Guess. I'm Professor of Politics and Environmental Studies here at Hendrix College, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our symposium on promoting livable communities. We have a very interesting program for you today. I want to thank you for attending if you're here in person or if you're joining us online. For about 5 years now, I've worked with two colleagues of mine here at Hendrix, Dr. Pesca in the Department of Psychology and Dr. Goldberg in Anthropology, on a partnership with the Arkansas Geriatric Education Collaborative at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. The overall theme of this work, which is funded by a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, is to help raise awareness and provide more services to Arkansans living with dementia. Various projects have included such things as dementia-friendly training for businesses in and around Arkansas, especially in the Conway area, dementia cafes for older Arkansans, gardening and technical literacy programming with senior citizens, and of course informational symposiums like this one. All of these projects have involved Hendrix students, many of whom go on to further study and have careers working with aging populations. I would now like to introduce to you our partner in this, Laura Spradley, to say a few words of welcome. Laura is the outreach coordinator at the Arkansas Geriatric Education Collaborative. Yes, Laura.
Well, I know you're not here to listen to me speak, so I'm just going to thank everyone for coming out. It's a beautiful day, and we're so happy that you're here to learn about livable communities. My grant is a federally funded HRSA grant, and I always love to give a shout out to the grant funder for this because this enables us to bring these wonderful programs to y'all free, obviously, so that always helps to have free events. But we can't thank Hendrix College enough. Dr. Guest, Dr. Pesca, and Dr. Goldberg have been wonderful partners and collaborators, and we could not do this without the help of our students who have just been fabulous as well. So we want to thank all of those people. On behalf of the Arkansas Geriatric Education Collaborative, I want to thank our friends at AARP. You've been wonderful to help us with this journey. And if we can ever help anyone about dementia friends, dementia-friendly businesses, if you are a caregiver of someone with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, please talk to me afterwards and I'll connect you with some great resources. So anyway, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Guest, for allowing us to be a part of this.
Thanks, Laura. As Laura mentioned, we've also formed this great collaboration with AARP, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today's event. As the director of AARP Livable Communities, Mike Watson works closely with AARP's 53 state offices, with volunteers and with key stakeholders to encourage towns, counties, and cities to be more livable for people of all ages. He leads the team that's responsible for supporting the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities, delivering direct technical assistance to communities, publishing free resources, and the AARP Livable Communities weekly e-newsletter, equipping mayors and local officials with the tools and resources, and delivering livability grants to communities nationwide through the AARP Community Challenge program. Before joining AARP in 2011, Mike served as a lobbyist on Capitol Hill for an advocacy organization focusing on issues affecting older adults. He holds a bachelor's degree in history with a minor in legal studies from Wingate University, a master's in public policy from the University of Maryland, and a professional certificate in municipal finance from the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. An avid runner, cyclist, and outdoor enthusiast, Mike is passionate about helping communities become places where people of all ages can thrive. Please join me in welcoming Livable Communities Director, Mike Watson.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It's a good reminder that I probably need to update my bio because wouldn't really describe myself as an avid runner or cyclist anymore. I spend most of my days chasing my But it's really great to be here. I was just telling Dr. Guest earlier, I went to a school in undergrad that was very much like Hendrix University. Very similar layout, similar type student body, and it was such a pleasure to be here, kind of walk around a little bit before today started, just to kind of get a feel for it. I was texting my wife who went to college with me, and was like, I feel like I'm back at Wingate. It was a very good feeling. So it's really, really great to be here and to join my colleagues from AARP Arkansas to talk a little bit about livable communities. So my bio kind of shared that I have the great pleasure of working in our national office, but also working with our 53 state offices, and that's not a typo or a misstatement. We have offices in all 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we have in every single one of those, our state offices are working to make communities more livable for all ages, and today that's about 1,000 different places where AARP is working, including several here in Arkansas. So you might kind of be wondering why this is important to AARP, and I know there's some AARP volunteers here and others, but some of you might know us as the organization that sends you a whole lot of mail when you're getting close to the age of 50, or the organization who lobbies on Capitol Hill for programs like Social Security, Medicare, retirement savings, or works in your state capital to bring supports for family caregivers, to expand access to broadband, but we're also a local organization, and our founding and our roots are in community. Up there on the screen is our founder, Dr. Ethel Percy-Andrus, who is a school teacher who, so the legend goes, was going around the community trying to meet with fellow retired educators, and found a former colleague who was living in a chicken coop in the community. She did not have enough money to have her own home. She did not have enough money to meet basic needs, and that's kind of what inspired her to found at that point, which was called the National Retired Teachers Association, and then ultimately became AARP. So our roots are in community, and that's why we do that work. We also do this work because of what you see on the screen. 8 in 10 people over the age of 50 and over the age of 65 tell us every single year that they want to remain in their homes and their communities as they age. Arkansas is one of the states I grew up in, North Carolina, which has seen a great influx of people moving to the state from other areas of the country. And that does happen, but by and large, we know that the vast majority of people, it's a very scientific term, want to remain in their homes and in their communities as they age, and it's because that's where they have their social connections, that's where their friends are, that's where their places of worship are, that's where their doctors are, that's where their families are, and they want to stay there as they live out their years. And I think the other important fact for why AARP is doing this is that what you see on the screen. The left side is kind of like a little purple, the right side is very purple. That represents the aging of our country, and you see it's kind of uneven in different places, but by and large, every single state is seeing an increase in the percentage of their population over the age of 65, and that's going to be felt by almost every single community, again in different ways, but this entire country is aging and going through a significant demographic shift. And we're not too far away from a really important one, which is coming in 2034. There's going to be more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18 in this country. So it's a very significant and important demographic marker. That also comes along with this one, which is January 1st, 2030. The first millennial, of which I am one, will turn 50. And if you are like me, you grew up as a millennial, people always talked about you as the youngest generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, you're going to experience this one day. We will be turning 50 very soon. And at that time, boomers, Gen Xers, millennials will all be over the age of 50 in this country. And millennials are projected to live longer with the largest generation in U.S. history. So this country is aging now, and it's aging in perpetuity as we all live longer lives and live longer lives in our community. But we also know it's really difficult to age in place in our community. So while everybody wants to live in their home and live in their community as they age, it's not that easy. Homes are not built for people to have the accessibility features. We have a colleague who says we have Peter Pan homes. They're built for people who are never going to age a day, and then we know that that's not the lived experience that we have. Our transportation systems are not really designed for people to get around communities if you're no longer driving a vehicle. Same thing when you look at public spaces, really difficult to access parks and public spaces, and communities are doing a different job on this, but if you're aging and you don't have the ability to get around your community, parks are not designed in a lot of ways to be accessible for anybody, no matter their needs. And what this leads to is it's difficult to get around, it's difficult to leave your house, so it leads to an increased sense of social isolation in the country, which we know has the kind of health impact of smoking 5 packs of cigarettes a day. So not very great. But we know that when we think about the things that people want as they age, there's common ground when you look across generations. When you think about, I mentioned earlier, Boomer, Millennials, Gen Xers, people tend to forget Gen Xers, but they're there. And there's a lot of common ground around what people want. Generally we want proximity to things that we can do in our community. We want access to volunteerism, we want access to good jobs. We want a diversity of housing options so that maybe if we can't remain in our home as we age, we have another home that's nearby that we can live in, stay in the community, and not have to go to an assisted living facility or a nursing home as we age. So we know that there's common ground across the generations. And this is what AARP, kind of the philosophy that we have when we talk about community design. We know that if you build a community that is great for an older adult, you're going to build a community that is great for everyone. Underscored on the previous slide was the fact that everybody wants it. We also know that when you look at some of the common features, and we'll talk about a bit about those in a minute, of what makes a livable community, they are things that are going to benefit anybody, no matter their age. So this brings us to this notion of communities for all ages. We want to build places that are great for all, and I just kind of, maybe I'll ask folks in the room, you see a few things on the screen, but for you, and you can probably just shout out, I think the space is probably open enough. What are some of the things that you think about in your life that are important to you in your community? Different types of housing, different types of transportation options. Anybody want to kind of just shout out something real quick? And I'll echo it for folks in the stream. If you can't hear it. Walkability.
Say good sidewalks.
Good sidewalks. Any others? All right. Parking.
Community events that bring people together.
Events, yep. So events, places to park to get to those events, places to walk to those events. Yeah, I mean, those are some. Healthcare, yeah. Healthcare is a great one. And these are kind of the things that we hear across the country, as well as things like housing, access to public spaces, transit systems that can get you from place to place. Maybe if you can't walk and you can't drive, you're going to need access to different types of mobility options. And those types of things are the things that we know are going to benefit all ages and also make a community livable and great for all ages. So that's what AARP's goal is in working to create more livable communities. We want to create places that are great for all ages, and the way that we do that is we develop resources that communities can use to put into practice. We don't just talk about the importance of it. We develop grant programs, we develop free toolkits that communities can go out, local leaders can use to take action, and kind of volunteers and activists can go out. We talked about walkability. You can go out, do an assessment to identify problematic intersections, and then present those findings to a local official. It's really important that folks feel empowered to take action to improve their community. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those areas. We talked about some transportation stuff. Another really important one is housing. It is when we ask our members broadly the most important topic to them in their community. It is having a home that is affordable, it's going to allow me to live in it as long as I want, and having access to a range of housing. So we're seeing communities taking action on this across the country, passing things like ordinances to allow more creation of accessory dwelling units, allowing and creating more affordable housing in the community, and doing more building and more development that's going to be accessible for folks no matter their age. And one example of that is in Lexington, Kentucky, as well as hundreds of municipalities across the country, where communities have passed ordinances that are going to make it easier to build things called accessory dwelling units, which are essentially a structure that is either part of or next to the main house that is going to allow somebody else to live on that property and either rent it or live in there and have somebody, maybe a family caregiver nearby, take care of them. And in Lexington, Kentucky, to kind of raise awareness and build education around it, they did a design competition with the University of Kentucky, and then held community forums around those designs to help people understand what an accessory dwelling unit was to them. We love acronyms and say things like ADUs, but it's very different when you're actually talking about it and model of what that could look like in your community. So this is one of the ways that communities across the country are taking action on housing. The next is in transportation, and we heard a lot of that earlier, right, on need for walkability, but also, as I mentioned, need for access to public transit. Streets that are going to be safe for cyclists are designed so that traffic can still move through and there's access to parking, but not at unsafe speeds where if you hit a person, we know that if a vehicle hits a person going 25 miles an hour, the chance of severe injury or death is far lower than somebody going 35 or 45 miles an hour. So there are ways to slow down streets and make them safer. I had the pleasure of kind of rolling through a few roundabouts in Conway, and here that is just the type of thing that we're talking about there. And then on the topic of roundabouts, we'll get to that in a minute, but one of the innovations that we're seeing is, I mentioned earlier, kind of a broad access of transportation options. And in the city of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, they created a new tool that basically allows anybody to go online or to call a phone number and get a sense of what are the various transportation options that are available to them. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for somebody who maybe they're trying to think about how they can get around without driving, to understand what are the options that are at their disposal, and then to actually book a ride. The other area we talked about is parks and public spaces. It's so critical to kind of the economic success of a downtown to have spaces that people want to come to events. And also that's going to be accessible for them to do that as well. But also have ample access to the outdoors. Again, just walking around on campus here was it's such a different state of mind when you're around open air and natural space. We know it's better for the environment, it makes the air cleaner. It also, there's research showing that it puts people in a better mental place when they are around trees and around the outdoors. So when communities do that, they're doing it with a focus on health and access to the outdoors, and also moving around downtown and spending money in shops. And this is a great example of that. AARP funded a community challenge grant in the city of Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, and they had a great network of murals that people were kind of walking around stumbling on. But with their community challenge grant, they created a map and a kind of guided interactive walking tour so that people would come to downtown and would know where all the murals were, and could walk through, stop and get a coffee, stop at restaurants along the way, and kind of feel different areas of the community that maybe they hadn't been to as well. So the last area I'll highlight here is on the area of social connection. I think we all saw this during the pandemic so severely, the importance of being able to connect with our fellow residents in the places we live. I mentioned earlier, the reason people want to stay in the communities they live in, it's not just because of affordability, it's because they want to stay connected to the people they care about and love and the institutions they care about and love. So communities have to take action to ensure that there's widely accessible information about what's happening, hosting events so people want to, and think about the different types of people that can be there and directly reach out to them across generations. And a really cool way that communities have done this is in Bowling Green, Kentucky. The age-friendly community working with the city created a over 50 citizens kind of government kind of curriculum where folks over the age of 50 went through this Citizens Academy where they would come in, work with city government, learn more about the inner workings of all the various commissions, everything that was going on in their community, and then they would be better empowered to be advocates in their community, telling people about the various things that are underway, and also frankly becoming better advocates to make their case in front of local government. So these little things like this can just help form social connections and help people kind of understand the inner workings of the government and their community a little bit more. So all those were a lot of really cool ideas, but I think there's always a question like, okay, so where to start? These are all great ideas, but how do we actually make it happen? That's what we're going to talk about. The first thing that we kind of recommend to folks is finding the common ground. Whenever a community is thinking about wanting to be a place that's more livable, wanting to be a place that's more better designed for older adults and all ages, is to start by reaching out and listening and holding events like today where you're bringing together people from across the community from different generations and understanding where there's concerns, what are people's aspirations for what they want their community to be, and try to find that common ground. Just an example of this is after the pandemic, when people were kind of in their homes for such a long time, the town of Millinocket, Maine, which is kind of very rural, like a ski community almost, called this event called the Katahdin Snowdown, where they brought together, intentionally reached out to older adults in the community and brought kids in the community, and had a kind of outdoor, at that point, a very safe social distancing outdoor event where they brought together people from multiple generations to just kind of share their experience, learn a little bit more of the community, and just have fun, have some hot chocolate and all of that, which seems a little weird to say on a day like today. But it's important to mix the fun while you're trying to find that common ground as well. The next is building on that, the importance of engaging and listening. There, in local government and other institutions, you might have ideas about what's the most important thing or what are the policies that need to be in place, but if you don't listen and actually ask the people in the community what they want or how they think about those things, I said the term accessory dwelling units earlier and ADUs, and people, you toss those terms around and people have no idea what they mean, but then when you actually talk about what that means for them and their community, it makes more sense. And the importance of reaching out, engaging, and listening. And I'll highlight an example from the city of Seattle, who received a Community Challenge grant, and as part of their age-friendly initiative in the community, they held a hackathon, which sounds really fancy, but really, and it involved a lot of technology and stuff. Really, it was getting people together, getting experts from the city, experts from colleges in the area, and residents together, and asking them what their most pressing problems were, and then breaking into groups and coming up with solutions to solve those problems. And out of that, the city was then able to award people who had kind of the best ideas, and the city then took those and started putting them into practice. So it's kind of these bringing people together and with a purpose, not just to kind of talk and listen, and actually have a result that comes of it. The next thing I'd say is the importance of, we were on the topic of roundabouts earlier, taking small but real steps. It's really hard to bring about long-term change in tiny steps, but you have to start. And the more that you can make it real to somebody, the better. So I don't know what the process was like when Conway put the roundabouts out there. I'm sure there was a lot of discussion, some probably strong points of view, and a lot of fear of the unknown about what that would mean to them. So in Anchorage, Alaska, Bike Anchorage wanted to test this concept of what a roundabout could mean to their community. So they put in a temporary roundabout with about $5,000 worth of materials using a grant to test that concept, collect data, show people that no, it's not going to, not allow you to go through town. It is going to slow down traffic speeds to make it safer for people. And you got a great image of, cars going by, somebody walking, and the city has then been able to take that input and create more permanent installations after this. So these small, tangible steps. I say small, $5,000 is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of content of grants and things like that, you can do these things like this that are replicable and build input and build support and just raise understanding for these longer-term, bigger changes that you're trying to make. Last two things I'll highlight is the importance of just making the connection and reaching out to folks who aren't typically in the room. I talked a lot about engaging and listening, but it's also important to think about who you're engaging and who is doing the talking and who's listening, and ensuring that when you're wanting to have these conversations, you're reaching out to the folks who maybe aren't typically in the room because they're holding them at a certain time of day, or they're holding them in a certain place, or whatever, and just spread that word as wide as you can. Great example of that in Bismarck, North Dakota. They brought together members of the community who recently moved there, who were immigrants or refugees, and had a kind of event to share meals and share their story. So there was that common ground of connection across generations, across different backgrounds, across different places where people grew up, and then the community could then have more solid connections to move forward. So it really is important to continue to think about that as you're pursuing this. And then this is where I'll make the AARP pitch for stuff, but taking action with proven frameworks. I think our tendency sometimes is to have a lot of things that we want to kind of launch and do. The great idea, one of the great things is that there's a lot of ideas across the country. You're always going to have a unique one, but you can also take somebody else's idea and steal it and implement it in your town and not spend as much time, energy, money as you would had you tried to create your own. So that's one of the real benefits that we see in the nationwide network of communities that have kind of signed up to become places that are great for all ages, called the AARP Network of Age-Friendly States and Communities. So today there are 750 communities across the country that are part of this network that go through a structured change process where they are focused on listening, engaging residents, developing a community-driven action plan. We're just talking about the one that's coming together in Little Rock, and then implementing that over the course of multiple years. And it's not just the local government, it is universities that are at the table, it is service providers, it's residents, it's volunteers, and the local government. So there are a host of sectors at the table, as well as ideas. We host monthly webinars where people are sharing everything that they're doing and learning, and we hear often from folks that they heard something on a webinar, they were able to learn more about it, get the roadmap, and then take it and implement it in their community. So never underestimate the importance of going to where the activity is happening, learning from that, and adapting it for your community. It's really important to note too that these 750 communities are not pursuing AARP's plan for their community, they're pursuing their plan for their community. They're listening to residents, they're shaping it. What AARP does is provide structure, resources, support, and help you get through that framework of putting things into practice and making it real. So that framework does lead to results. We know roughly 60% of the communities that have joined the network have gone through the early steps of the process. About 60% of them have reported back that it helped them garner additional public or private sector funding to support aging initiatives. And almost 9 in 10 communities in the network report back that the framework and going through the age-friendly work and the relationships and commitment that's built along the way helps them advance policy change and overcome barriers in their community to becoming a place that's great for all ages. And there are other resources to help. I mentioned earlier the AARP Community Challenge, which is AARP's Livable Communities Grant Program, which since 2017 has granted almost $13 million across 1,000 grants in 700 communities. Several of those projects that I just showed earlier were funded through the AARP Community Challenge, and they emerged from age-friendly communities that were doing the work, listening to residents, and coming up with ideas, and then we're able to get them funded and supported. And what it is, it's a grant program that is really focused on quick action. It is not a 5-year planning process where you have to fill out a lot of paperwork. It is a quick action grant program where projects need to be done within 6 months. So it's really kind of thinking about those shovel-ready, tangible things that are going to make what it needs to be a livable community real to the people who live there. So again, I talked a little bit about some of the numbers of communities. The really important thing about this too is it's not just a program that's available just to urban centers. Historically, roughly 40% of our grants have gone to rural areas, 40% have gone to suburban areas, and 20% have gone to suburban communities. These are by no means kind of rigid definitions. This is just the way our grant program has shaken out. We really want to kind of continue to support communities of all sizes and all types. And also, about a third of the communities in the age-friendly network are also rural communities as well. So it's not just kind of big, Los Angeles, Boston that are doing the work in the network. And then finally, there are a load of other free resources that are available. You probably can see all the type on there on our website, aarp.org/livable. There you can go see our livable communities map, pull up communities across your state that are taking action. You can see all of the community challenge grantees in your state, all of the age-friendly communities in your state and across the country. You can find similar projects. If you're interested in learning about a topic, you can learn there. We have 20 to 30 free publications and resources that you can take and put into action in your community. A tool called the Livability Index that allows you to assess your community's livability on a range of factors, and a whole lot of other ones that I won't stand up here for 20 minutes and list off. But I encourage you to go to aarp.org/livable to learn more. And there's the Hendrix. Thank you so much for having me here today, and really looking forward to hearing from Ashley to share a little bit about the work here in Arkansas.
Thank you very much, Mike. There's more here about the roundabouts in Conway. The Conwegians in the room can probably speak to this better than I can. When I came 16 years ago, the first ones were built, and the legend is the townsfolk came out to watch them build it. It's like, what's going on here? This is something so foreign to us. So it was quite the attraction when they first came. Now I think we're the Can we claim this the highest per capita roundabouts in the country?
Yes.
Yeah, there are a lot of them here. Yeah. In just a few minutes, we'll have time for some questions for Mike. But before that, we want to drill down a little bit. He obviously leads this effort nationwide through the 53 state offices. But we want to talk a little bit more about Arkansas and Little Rock, focusing on Little Rock. And so I want to introduce our next speaker that will lead us through that. Ashley McBride has extensive experience in the nonprofit field and now currently directs the Arkansas AARP State Office and its comprehensive and far-reaching mission to tackle issues important to the 50-plus population. Ashley previously served as the Director of Education at the American Indian Center of Arkansas. In this role, she created a digital platform and established the Assessing Choices in Education program. Her efforts were recognized by the U.S. Department of Education, and her program was ranked as one of the top 5 ACE programs in the nation. A native of Little Rock, Ashley earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Spanish and Pre-Medicine from Spelman College in Atlanta, and a Master of Science degree from the University of Colorado. I think I should probably pause and point out the liberal arts degrees that we're collecting here. Right? Ashley's scientific research focused on neurological diseases and their effects on the human body, specifically Alzheimer's disease. Ashley's philanthropic efforts include organizing grassroots campaigns and providing access to competitive careers through college preparation, trades, certifications, and skill development to the 50-plus community. She serves as a board member and Alzheimer's disease educator for the Wise with Words Geriatric Consulting and Training Organization. Please join me in welcoming AARP State Director Ashley McBride.
Thank you, Dr. Giss, for having us here today. As he so eloquently mentioned, I have my education is a liberal arts education, and I have a background in ensuring that we advocate for not just the 50-plus community, but all communities that have been disadvantaged in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And I want to him before I go into the actual work of AARP Arkansas that I have a sense of nostalgia being here as I attended governor's school many, many years ago on this very campus and had some amazing memories and made some long-lasting friendships. So thank you again for having us. I would like to kind of go into some information about AARP Arkansas before delving more specifically into Little Rock's work. So AARP Arkansas, we have an overall mission, just for AARP in general, to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And we delve a little bit deeper into that at AARP Arkansas to be the innovative hub to provide community outreach and engagement, advocacy-based work, as well as educational resources for the 50-plus community as well as their families. So our mission is geared towards ensuring that all of the resources that the 50-plus community needs, that we are the hub where they can immediately provide some of those resources to them. And if we can't provide those resources directly, then we partner with local organizations to help mitigate some of those and provide resources through them. So we work very diligently with ensuring that we work with the issues that are most important or pertinent to our community members, and one of those, of course, are livable communities. And if you're like many people, you initially think, well, AARP, what does that have to do with livable communities work? Well, AARP is more than insurance. It's more than discounts. I know those are things that we hear a lot about, but AARP has a strong foundation in ensuring that communities are safe and livable for the 50-plus community and population. And a lot of our work has been geared towards ensuring those communities are not only safe and walkable, but also that there are various types of housing that are available for the 50-plus population. And what we decided to do was actually take a closer look into what does that look like in Little Rock and allow that to be more of a pilot opportunity to then spread that work throughout Arkansas, which presented a wonderful partnership with Dr. Guest to also do some assessment in Conway to see what does that livable communities work look like here, serve as a secondary pilot, and then use that data to spread that information and to do some maybe smaller projects, as Mike emphasized, and allow them to grow more into the advocacy-based work to actually implement some of those ordinances, changes, and recommendations that we found in our Little Rock Code audit. So I would like to go through some of that information with you today just to give you a better idea of what that pilot program looks like. What does livable communities work look like in Arkansas, more specifically in Little Rock, which is our key community? And then how can we actually affect change in Little Rock and spread that information and create more livable programs throughout our state? So with that being said, most of the zoning codes were created long before our current time, and we're seeing unprecedented growth right now. But if you can imagine, post-war housing boom, there were not a lot of needs for, expanding middle housing, accessory dwelling units, although they existed, right? They just may have been named something a little bit different or may have been seen differently. So while we're trying to accommodate the unprecedented growth that we're seeing throughout Little Rock specifically, we have to think about what makes a community more vibrant, more walkable, more attractive and desirable, not only to our locals, but also to transplants who oftentimes come to Arkansas because Arkansas is known as a retirement community. And more specifically in Little Rock, how can we look at our codes and encourage those dispersed, low-density developing areas, those that have, been recently undervalued, like in our Main Street areas, in our downtown areas, and make those areas more neighborhood friendly, more walkable, make those areas have a lower need or a decreased need for a car, and allow people to actually get out and enjoy their communities. Walk to the grocery store, maybe even walk to doctor's appointments, walk to places that, allow them to interact with other citizens, and whether that's recreational or business. So AARP is deeply interested in making places more livable, more walkable, creating various housing choices, and more specifically, we're focusing on middle missing housing. And that term is very interesting because it allows for various types of housing that don't take away from the substance and the history of neighborhoods. So it allows us to maybe focus more on duplexes or townhomes, and if they are being renovated, allowing them to keep that architecture and that history that is similar to the other homes in those neighborhoods. So what are ways that we can change those codes and allow for maybe smaller apartment buildings with 4 to 8 units, or smaller just housing units with lower levels that are maybe not 35 feet, they may be 30 or they may be 20 feet, or some may be higher if they're multiple living dwelling units. But what can we do to assess what that looks like in Little Rock? So AARP collaborated with the Congress for New Urbanism, and we worked to identify how we can look at the most significant land use regulations in Little Rock and what was acting as a barrier or barriers to achieving our goal to create missing middle housing, or to assess what accessory dwelling units currently exist and how can we add more within our community. And this allowed us to create more of a roadmap for policy advocacy for AARP Arkansas at the state office level. So we asked ourselves throughout this work, what were the 3 questions that we needed to assess as we're undergoing this investigation, if you will. So one of those questions is, what are the most significant barriers to creating better neighborhoods in Little Rock? Secondly, what are the simplest code changes that can take effect but have the biggest impact? So Mike mentioned that some communities are having various opportunities to bring locals in. Maybe it's a community event. Maybe it's meeting with your local legislators, which we have recently had an opportunity to do. Maybe it's identifying small changes that will lead to big impacts like roundabouts that Conway has, but also Little Rock has increased roundabouts, you know, the sideways or the walkways. Like, we'd like to have more sidewalks in our communities, in our neighborhoods that may have been built in the 1970s where they didn't think about that. Or maybe we want to have more safe bike lanes so that people can cycle safely throughout our streets. And third, how can AARP Arkansas at the state office level take advantage of these opportunities and empower people to really have a say in choosing how they live as they age? So as we did our code analysis, we identified the most problematic coding barriers, and we wanted to provide a simple yet clear opportunity for suggestions to our state legislature, more specifically to our local legislature, to let them know these are the opportunities for improvement. This is how we could maybe make some small changes, and these are some options for even larger changes if you guys will allow us to allow this work to expand over the number of years. So the work that we're doing, we're expecting this to be the foundation and laying the groundwork for 3 to 5 years to come. So even with our smaller projects, we're expecting long-term impacts. So as we do that, we have to understand that the audit and the code analysis that was conducted is not intended to be an overall analysis of the entire state. Of course, this is a small subset of the work that we're doing, and we want to use this to encourage other local communities to have a roadmap of work that they would like to do as well. And also to, again, identify the barriers and allow us to address small changes, and that could be eliminating, clarifying, or adding specific words in existing codes. And that's an important thing to carefully study. Maybe they're, you know, instead of saying we want families to consist of individuals that are related by blood or by adoption, maybe we want to add that others in the home may not necessarily be related by blood or by adoption, but they still may dwell within that particular unit, whether it's single-family housing or multifamily housing. So as we address what some of these coding audits are, what some of the codes are that exist in Little Rock, we went through a number of documents that allowed us to see the Little Rock zoning ordinance, as well as subdivision regulations, the 2018 master street plan, the land use plan, etc. And those allowed us to assess some specific recommendations throughout Arkansas, and there are about 9. Now, I will say, we may not tackle all 9. We may start at 1 or 2, we may even start at 3, and then over the course of 3 to 5 years, we will see if maybe there's some overlapping information where we can take those top things that we have seen kind of be repeating priorities throughout our community and answer those questions and address those first, and then delve into a little bit deeper into the coding ordinances that we have discovered. So some of our 9 subject areas that we have focused on include permanent accessory dwelling units. So, of course, ADUs is very popular. The ADU terminology is popular not just because AARP loves a good abbreviation or a good acronym, but because we see across all the 53 states and areas that we have livable communities work, that missing middle housing and ADUs are having a repeat effect, or they're coming up usually in those types of conversations where we're saying that there is a need for affordable housing that may be beyond what is provided or available in the current communities. And it may be because a family is now, all of the children have grown up, they're empty nesters, and they need a more accessible dwelling unit without stairs. Or maybe it's because we have some people in the millennial generation that want to be surrounded by each other, right? And they may not have a family yet, and they want to be more in the downtown, more vibrant areas of the community. So the second thing that we wanted to assess is eliminating or refining on-site parking requirements. So So normally our single dwelling units, as well as like our general multifamily, they have very strict on-site parking requirements. And for a single family home, you're expected to have at least 1.5 parking spots available for the tenants of that home, whether renting or owning. And multifamily is even stricter because you're expected to have a parking spot for at least 1 adult per multifamily unit. And what we're advocating for is less parking spots. So that kind of sounds harsh, but the truth is, if you're looking for walkability and affordability, having a car may not be a priority, or you may look for a specified place where more people can park in a group setting. And that may be a little bit further. You may walk to your car instead of having it attached to your dwelling unit, and that's okay. There are so many places around Little Rock that you can park. If we do have a little bit of focus more on the housing opportunities and less on the parking, we can focus on smaller lot sizes and more affordability and less on increasing the price of the unit because we have to accommodate parking. And it's interesting, as we went through our code audit analysis, just adding parking adds approximately $10,000 to the overall cost of housing. And just imagine how much more you could use that $10,000 for if you didn't have to worry about on-site parking, or if you had on-site parking but it was maybe 20 spaces instead of 100. Third, we want to ease Little Rock regulations that discourage working from home. As we know, I mean, I kind of feel like we're post-COVID era, but I'm not really sure if I can say that safely. I know that during COVID, a lot of organizations transitioned to being able to work from home or having some type of hybrid opportunity, right? And so working from home is a staple in today's community. And even with AARP Arkansas, we work from home twice per week. And so we want to ensure that, Little Rock understands that this is something that is not going away anytime soon. This is a standard that should be adjusted. And how are the laws going to actually accommodate people that work from home and not discourage that? Fourth, we want to accommodate a wider variety of households. So we talked about that previously. Kind of limiting and not allowing Little Rock to be so restrictive with their definitions. Those restrictions on how they define family units, how they define what a family should consist of, and how many units should go in a dwelling unit or an ADU, it really makes it difficult to add missing middle housing or ADUs within our community because the language is so restrictive. So is it really helpful to have all of, these distinctive words inside of those definitions, or is it going to harm people that need to have the affordability and the additional options for housing that they're looking to receive? Also, for our ADUs, our current codes, they talk about having separate units if you're going to have an ADU at least 6 feet away from the current unit or from the main property. Well, we want to have some options, like you saw in some of the pictures there, where maybe the ADUs are attached to the main dwelling unit. They may not be completely separate, or there may be a basement suite or in-law suite. We want to have an opportunity to assess all types of living options and see what's best for those families. And when they go to the commission and they ask for certain opportunities to add this housing, if you have a wide range of options that already exist because the code language has changed, when the families present options, whether it's the homeowner or developer, it's more likely that it'll be approved. 5, we want to make middle missing housing easy to identify. We want to be able to appropriate that evenly throughout various neighborhoods. Currently in Little Rock, we have like the Urban Housing Division, which has much less restrictions when it comes down to the types of housing you can have. So like in our main town, midtown areas, more in the downtown area, also in the Highland Park area, the more of kind of like the downtown subsector of what's going on in Little Rock. We have opportunities where you're going to see maybe some stores on the bottom level and housing at the top. You're going to see an opportunity where those smaller apartments are going to have maybe some units that are storefronts, or they look like storefronts that have been converted into other types of housing. But the urban district is very restricted to those areas that I mentioned. Of course, you're going to see that in the smaller North Little Rock downtown area as well, but we can't delve too much into the North Little Rock part because, of course, this is focusing mostly on Little Rock. But how can we take those urban areas and those urban code opportunities and remove those restrictions and those other zones so they can be more similar to our urban code zones and have them be a little bit less restrictive in their language? Next, we want to create a compact, walkable, mixed-use zoning opportunity, and that is going to allow for businesses, more business opportunities, small businesses to move into the areas, whether urban or whether a little bit more suburban. So like our Ben, our Bryan areas, they will have an opportunity, of course, to engage with business opportunities as well if this pilot opportunity takes off the way that we're expecting. But we really want it to be where we have a mix of walkability for those who can walk and who are able-bodied to do so, but also have an opportunity for those who still need additional needs and they need to either have assistance as they're traveling, have access to a car, etc., to have those options available as well. So what are the mixing that we can do to make our areas a little bit more either walkable friendly or just community friendly, where we're embracing all types of livable accommodations and opportunities for people to live and age without the necessary needs of assistance if they don't need that or they're not in that place of life where they need additional assistance at that point. Also, we want to refine Little Rock's regulations on non-comforting uses and buildings. So we want to allow all of the buildings that maybe are not being used or, that are not non-comforting. These are more of our general population buildings where we're just conducting business. We're not having the conversation in those particular buildings about housing or affordability there. Those are just general businesses that we need to discuss. How are those non-comforting buildings in proximity to our actual comforting buildings? How are they related to each other? How can we increase walkability from those non-comforting buildings to the comforting or to our residential communities? How can we increase those? And what does that look like in our various coding areas, in our various districts, well beyond just focusing on downtown, which we know is going to be a place where we're going to consider that to be walkable. And then we want to update the actual Little Rock zoning ordinance. So there are several ordinances that we identified throughout this research, and there's just, in general, no way we can tackle all of those in 1 year. But what we can identify, the first step is, what are some of those definitions, like we mentioned, that we can tackle, changing a little bit of the verbiage or the language inside of those definitions, identifying how we can make those small changes to have a large impact. After we change some of the coding regulation definitions and we're meeting with our state legislatures, we can say, hey, as a state legislator, we have all of these lawmakers. This is what's happening. This is how your communities are being impacted. These are our recommendations. Now that we've identified the recommendations, how can we move forward in this particular zone, right? We know that there are many talks about expanding housing in our Midwest area of Little Rock. We have our central area where they're adding more shopping centers. We have tons of hospitals and shopping centers and restaurants in our Midtown area as well. What does affordability look like in that area? As we're looking at affordability, normally as the per capita increases, the affordability decreases. So as you're looking at, okay, we want our 50+ population to be able to afford missing middle housing. We want them to be able to afford our different types of ADUs. how can we make it affordable if everyone is entering and transplanting back into those higher density populations or higher density neighborhoods that are going to drive up the cost of the properties there? So how can we mitigate that to where either we're decreasing the size of those lots, or either we're, reducing the price by having less parking spaces? What can we do, and what can we be proposing now? What types of projects can we be funding to help do some of that work? And so I kind of want to shift gears, because I know I talked a lot about Little Rock and some of the coding ordinances and some of the information that the code audit found as far as our analyses. But also, Mike mentioned something extremely important, which is our community challenge grants. So as we're, just completing the state portion of that, because Mike still has quite a bit of work to do on his end, we have we received maybe about 39 applications this year for various projects to be conducted throughout the state. And of course, these include livable communities work. And so with that being said, there was an assessment of how can we fund projects to make our communities more livable, more accessible, more accommodating to the 50+ population. And those projects were far beyond Little Rock. We received them for all over the state. And we love to focus on rural populations, not just urban, because rural oftentimes have less access to resources and opportunities as well as funding. And so with that being said, we have an opportunity to receive funding for up to 10 projects, which it may just be the top 3, just depending on what they determine at the national office. But oftentimes the state office also has the opportunity to fund additional projects that were not funded on the national level. So as we're thinking about making communities more livable, what are some of the projects that we look forward to funding? And I'll just give you an idea of some of the projects that we funded last year. So we had a municipality, which we can fund those as well if those projects are focusing on increasing livability, that wanted to create a park for the 50+ population where they can bring their grandchildren out, actually enjoy, but they had no place to sit. So it's fun to watch your children, it's fun to watch your grandchildren enjoying the outdoors and enjoying each other, but you have to be mindful that, you have ergonomic seating or, places that you can actually watch that's close enough where they can feel safe, but also you may want some stands where they can, just actually rest. We've had projects consider even water fountains and shades and flags to provide ample comfort and shade for our 50+ residents who wanted to go to the park. So we did fund some of those projects last year, and we're also considering food insecurity, which is a big thing right now. When you're looking at making sure communities are livable, food and the cost of food is a big part of livability, right? If you don't have access to appropriate food and the nutrition that goes into that, the community may not be as livable and sustainable as it needs to be. So food insecurity, with inflation being a very high priority, is also an important priority and target for AARP Arkansas. So we took some time to look into food insecurity. How can we partner with food banks and provide food to those who may not have access, and to families, not just AARP members, that need to have an opportunity to receive food and access to that. And I'll finish with that opportunity. We conducted a fraud shred fest. And with that shred fest, we collected maybe 3 truckloads of food, of donations from our community members that allowed other communities to go on and be more livable. And we were able to positively impact thousands of Arkansans through some of those initiatives. So as Mike stated, those are some of the smaller projects that have long-term and lasting impacts. And those are the types of projects that we will continue to fund. These are the types of projects, and this is the type of work that AARP Arkansas will continue to focus on. And as we're doing our livable communities work, just know that that doesn't end with verifying that code audits have the proper language. It also includes ensuring that our advocates, which we have a wonderful advocacy team, our advocates are well equipped and well informed to go to the Capitol or to write those briefs or to tell their stories on how these livable communities actually will impact them in a positive way. And if their communities are not currently livable, how that has also impacted them. And we can encourage our lawmakers to make the positive changes that Little Rock and Greater Arkansas needs for the future. Thank you.
I put chairs up here and you can sit. Okay, we have some time for some questions. I just want to say, if you're in the audience here, raise your hand and I'll ask one of my students to walk around with this microphone up here. And then if you're online, you can use the chat function and another student is monitoring and will share those questions as well. So with that, what questions do you have for Ashley and Mike? Just one here in the front row. No, wait for it to turn green.
Perhaps more an observation. Little Rock just was hit with this horrible tornado, and this seems like an ideal time for our city directors to engage with livable communities in the audits as people begin to rebuild. I wonder if there are items online that we could possibly, as an organization, share with those who are going through this rebuilding process.
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I was kind of flew into Little Rock today and was coming up the highway and just seeing some of the devastation from the tornado was just really tough to see. I grew up in a community in North Carolina that got hit by hurricanes quite frequently, so very used to that type of devastation. And we know that older adults are more at risk of being cut off from services, more at risk from death, more at risk of a lot of things when disasters strike. And there's, I think, several resources that folks can think about from a response perspective as well as a preparedness and thinking ahead perspective. One of those is, recently I mentioned about 20, 30 resources that we have online. We created a tool called alongside FEMA, we created a tool called the AARP Disaster Resilience Toolkit. So it's like a 40-page, really digestible, I say that not jokingly, it really is digestible at 40 pages, resource that folks can kind of flip through, learn a little bit about how communities can be better prepared to reach older adults and when a disaster strikes. Those first several 24 hours can be so critical to ensure people have the services that they need, and some guidance to start thinking about as we're seeing disasters more frequently in places, guidance to think about how we can and should think about our codes and community as well as kind of from the policy angle and also from the practical program angle. What are the things that we need to put in place when we're building so that they're going to be a little bit more resilient to those disasters that are hitting? What are the things that we need to put in place to ensure that we can reach older adults? What are the things that we need to put in place to ensure that folks can get out of town and get access to services? So that is available on AARP.org/disaster resilience. There's a lot of great work that AARP is also doing with the American Red Cross through a partnership to support communities as well in that response. Ashley, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Other questions? Yeah, do you have a microphone? Oh, sharing. Okay, here's one from online.
Is this on? Okay. Has there been any mention of the Little Rock Age-Friendly Commission?
The answer to that question is no, there hasn't been today. Although we were just talking about it before the event. So Little Rock is a member of the AARP network of age-friendly communities and does have an aging commission that has been doing some work to become a more livable community, become an age-friendly community. I know, like a lot of communities across the country, COVID made getting together really tough, right? So we're seeing a lot of communities kind of, Ashley kind of made a point around, the pandemic's not over, but there's, we're kind of, as a country, moving on to a degree. A lot of those age-friendly communities across the country that weren't able to get together during COVID have reconnected and are doing some work. So I know Little Rock is in the process of kind of going through their action plan, bringing together, writing that, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is a kind of community-driven shared set of priorities. It's not just the city of Little Rock doing the work, it's folks around the community, service providers, organizations, nonprofits, volunteers, who are going to be kind of working on those items within the action plan. And we know that those are going to lead to results down the road for Little Rock, and looking forward to the progress there. Ashley?
I do want to add that AARP Arkansas is a partner with the Little Rock Age Friendly Committee. And one thing that we want to do more of, and one thing I think we've learned through being a part of that committee, is that there are many ways that you can make communities more livable, more age friendly. But it's good to be a part of, like, being on that listening and that soundboard and knowing what people in the 50+ community, what they're looking to do before we enter those communities and say, hey, this is what you need. We actually have one of our volunteer leaders here from the commission that serves as a leader and also provides some great resources and valuable feedback for how AARP can serve on that committee as well. And for the Age Friendly Commission, one thing that we want to do in the future is work with them more, like, having Mike here being a sounding board for what livable communities work looks like in Little Rock and Arkansas. We want to have more partnerships with them to provide more expert analysis and provide more information and resources so that we can better assist them in their future endeavors. So yes, that's something that we will continue to work with and work with our commission on that.
There's one. Well, just so the people online can hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I just want to make a comment. My son lives in Hillcrest in Little Rock, and what I like about that community is it's self-contained. For older people, you can walk to the Kroger's, you can walk to Starbucks, you can walk to a restaurant, you can walk to a service station, you can walk to a church. They have sidewalks. To me, that at my age, I don't have to drive all over town to get to a grocery store. So anyway, that's just why I like self-contained communities. Thank you.
Well, I know you said it was a comment, not a question. I'll take that to provide a comment back. But I think what you just described, though, is like when we talk about livable communities and what people want, that's what most people want, right? It's one thing to, I'll put myself, for example. I live in a neighborhood that is walkable. It is not walkable to anything, though, right? Which is really important. It's one of the reasons why I want to move. But having access to those services, having access to things you actually want to do, you can walk up to your Kroger, maybe you have a coffee shop there that you want to walk to, is so important, and you're able to stay connected with folks in your neighborhood, see folks on the shopping center. So, I mean, that's exactly the type of thing. We use these terms like compact and dense, but that's what it means. It means things that you can walk to, things that you can enjoy in your community, and you can see your neighbors and your family members and loved ones on a day-to-day basis just walking, rather than having to drive across town to go get something.
And I'll briefly add that Hillcrest was actually a model neighborhood in our code audit analysis. So when we were looking at livability and walkability and accessibility, Hillcrest was one of the top rated neighborhoods in our analysis.
Do you find that safety is a factor in anything that you do or evaluate? I know that's always a hot topic, but.
Yeah, I think safety is a term that means a lot. And yes, right, I think what is more core to safety in a community than not being killed while walking and struck by a motor vehicle, right? Like Safety means a lot of things to a lot of people, but yes, I think at a core, when we ask people broadly what are the most important things that they care about in their community, safety is always top up there. You want to be able to do that walk to the grocery store and walk safely on a sidewalk, walk safely across a road. So yes, something that is core to what livability is, and core to a lot of older adults and the communities they want to live in.
Maybe I'll ask one. So my students will chuckle because I'm going to talk about Robert Putnam. And I bet you guys are familiar from your policy work. I know Mike has probably been exposed to him many times. But Robert Putnam writes this book called POLI Alone. He talks about the erosion of social capital in our communities. And he ends up really blaming it on the television. This was written a while back. And that, you know, we stopped sitting on our porches because the almighty television is. We spend our, you know, our evening hours in front of the TV. Maybe a simplistic approach, but you think of things like the television and, you know, designing 2-car garages so you can just park in your, you know, you don't have to really be outside. And the automobile, in fact, right? And we're kind of, Southern culture is just all about the automobile. So I guess I have a chicken and egg question. Do we need to build these communities that are walkable with services so people come, or do we need citizens to demand those things be part of their communities? I mean, how do you get people to leave behind the car and get out there and walk and spend time with people?
It's a really tough question. And I don't know if the way to do that is to tell people that the car is wrong, right? Like, we love cars in this country, and the vast majority of people over the age of 50 get around driving today, and there's a real affinity for that. So it's, I think the way to kind of do that is to show the story you just shared about your community and being able to walk to the grocery store. I think it's really important. So to answer your question, it's yes, right? You need to build those things and show those things, and maybe you don't have to have a $100 million investment in a community to build it, but you can show it with some temporary things, some kind of close a street down for a weekend and do a pop-up fair where you have vendors and local businesses come in to sell their goods and show people what it could look like if that street was not, you know, kind of didn't have cars going 45 miles an hour down it, and it was a place where people could come and sell, and people of all ages could get together, riding their bikes and things like that. So there are things like that you can do, and yes, we need to build more communities like that are connected to neighborhood amenities and services. We also need to look at our neighborhoods that we live in today and think about small ways that we can improve them so they're just a little bit safer to be around, a little bit more engaging to be in. We're a little bit more connected to the areas around us, and kind of do it on that level while we're building and also showing as well. Ashley, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
And as we're assessing, you know, and during our code analysis in Little Rock, one of the big things that we researched was transportation. As you know, we don't have a robust transit system in Little Rock. You know, we have our buses, right, our city buses, but we don't have like a centralized train station where it goes throughout the city and someone can just hop on the train and go to their destination. So I think that our community needs to, you know, invest in that aspect. Maybe not a robust train system, that's just an example, but we need to really assess transportation methods. You know, of course, you're seeing those scooters now, you know, popping up everywhere. People just hop on a scooter and go to the local store, and I think that's an option. Maybe not so much for 50 plus though. So right, without injury maybe, I'm not sure, but just not to you know, complicate it. I just think we should look at, you know, transportation options, but we should also look at a way that we can encourage businesses to go to those livable areas. If we're going to, you know, increase the missing middle housing in various districts across Little Rock or across the state, what incentives can we provide business owners that can also come into the area. You know, maybe there's some type of tax credit, or what are other benefits that can incentivize those businesses coming there, and what services are lacking, what services can be provided to those residents that will then boost that intercommunication between those residents as well as the businesses. So I think it's multiple ways that we can do this assessment. We just have to start with what's available, what are we looking to do, and then actually making those small steps to initiating that work.
What do you all look for in your grant applications that lead to successful funding?
Well, I can talk about the local level, and I'll let Mike talk about overall. So for us, what we look for is an opportunity to provide some type of resource or remove barriers for the 50-plus population. Now, it's not strictly related to 50-plus as far as like their project objective, but it must be at least a main focus. So how are you going to incorporate providing resources for the 50-plus, but you also may be focusing on youth, or you may be creating an opportunity for youth to be volunteers and serving the 50-plus, or vice versa, so increasing intergenerational work. Our main focus is, is this project going to either eliminate a barrier for the 50-plus population? Is it going to solve some type of a problem in the next 6 months? Is it actually doable in the next 6 months? Because that's actually a big concern. Are they going to be able to continue this project if they only receive funding from AARP Arkansas one time? You know, how sustainable is this project in the future? Is there a great need for this project? And, you know, what's the impact? Impact is always something you want to assess when funding a project. Does it have a small impact where maybe it's only impacting one family or one person? Or does it have a lasting impact where maybe 300 to 1,000 people, if not more, are going to benefit from these funds? So we like to assess the entire scope of the project from those standpoints before we determine who should be presented for funding.
I think Ashley said it really well. The only thing I would add is just a different way of saying what she said, which is what we're really looking to do with everything Ashley just said is just kind of jumpstart change, right? Like these grants, we talked about the AARP Community Challenge, they're not huge, they're not small, but they're not $100,000 grants from your state DOT that's going to do something like this. So really what we're trying to look for is like, how is that spark? How is that amount of funding going to, are you going to Ashley's point, be able to get it done in the timeline, which is really important. And in doing that, have you done the engagement work at the front end, right? Have you already are you in a community where you've done listening, where you kind of listen to older adults, that input is reflected, and there's a plan for how this is going to help you jumpstart that work beyond it, because we know that those ones that have done the hard work at the front end to engage older adults, bring folks into the conversation, it's tied to something. Maybe there is a kind of code reform effort going on, and this is going to help you overcome that initial barrier. That's the other critical part is, you know, what do you think it's going to lead to, and have you done the work at the front end to kind of bring folks along, so that in that quick timeline of 6 months, you're able to get it done, and we know that it's, you know, it's going to help you generate another $100,000 in funding, or kind of pass an ordinance or something.
Another one from online.
We have 2 questions from online, so I'll give them to you one at a time. The first one is, how does climate change affect addressing livable communities issues?
It does. So we were just talking about this earlier. Disasters are becoming more frequent. Call it whatever you want to call it. Disasters are becoming more common, and they have a more direct impact on older adults than any other group, particularly older adults of color as well in a lot of communities. So the more frequent disasters that we're seeing are impacting livability today. They're making it more hard for people to live in certain communities. And communities that are thinking about their future are thinking about demographic change, and they're also thinking about what are the other conditions that are changing around. So think how you're kind of planning for those future disasters to ensure you're more resilient, and how you're developing certain areas. I'll give you an example. In Gulfport, Mississippi, the city was kind of devastated by Hurricane Katrina, and they had an entire neighborhood of homes that were just demolished. The mayor and the community made the really tough call of saying, you know what, it's not sustainable for us to rebuild those homes as they were. So we're going to create a community-wide park that is going to be a place that, as we get more hurricanes coming through, we get more flooding, it's an area that is designed to sustain that flooding, and it's going to be more resilient. It's a really hard decision. There's less housing in that community now because of it. They've built elsewhere. Now that area that was housing is now a community park. It's a dog park, it's an outdoor classroom, and it's going to be, when disasters come through, it's going to be more apt to respond to those, be a little bit more resilient. So communities across the country, Little Rock in this area of Arkansas are dealing with those right now. My hometown in North Carolina is dealing with those. So I think that's just thinking about today, thinking about how we're going to reach and respond to older adults' needs in that time, and also thinking about the future and responding to the conditions around us is really important. Ashley, want to add to that?
I think it's also important to note that if you're in an area that's going to have some type of increased opportunity to have a disaster, and really you need to have a plan in place. But one thing we see in the more urban communities, especially in Little Rock, is in these livable communities, there are not many shelters for storms, as you may see in the more suburban areas or the more rural areas, just depending on which part of the states. States like Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas are more prone to disasters. So as we're looking at climate change and how that's impacting, another opportunity to really assess is where can those shelters be located throughout various cities to make that be another scope of livable communities, and how quickly can the 50 plus get to those shelters. What's the proximity? Is it actually going to accommodate them, or is it going to be an additional barrier? So those are other things that we should and will be assessing.
That question is, how many people are 55 plus in Little Rock?
Oh gosh, I'm not exactly sure the number, but I will say that in Little Rock there are more. The 50 plus population is approximately 38% of Arkansas, and a little bit more of Little Rock. When we look at our aging population, because Arkansas is a retirement state, we do see that people will transplant from other states to come to Arkansas as well as Little Rock to have more friendly communities, more age-friendly communities where they can live. And those oftentimes lead to a lack of access to different or various types of housing. So as we're assessing like that 38% or 40% number rising between now and 2030, which we are expected to see an increase in that, which of course we're going to see more people that are 65 plus than are 18 and under. So as we're assessing what the housing opportunities are, we should also be looking at in Little Rock, how are those housing opportunities going to extend beyond increasing new subdivisions of single family homes, which is what we're seeing a lot of in Little Rock, and less of actual age-friendly communities outside of like the common nursing homes that you're accustomed to seeing. So that's a great question. The exact number, I don't want to tell you wrong, but I do know it's around 38 to 40%.
Okay, with that, let's give a round of applause for Mike and Ashley. We have time for a break now. We're going to take a 10-minute break, which will get us to 2:40. If you haven't yet discovered the restrooms, they're sort of behind this wall, so if you go around either way. At the end of the symposium, we're going to have refreshments, but if you can't wait, you can go here to our little grill and just tell them that you're with the symposium and get a coffee or a tea or a soft drink. And when we come back, you get to hear from some of my students and some of the information they found thinking about Arkansas and livable communities. And then time for more questions from all of us with the panel discussion after. So thank you very much. everyone. No problem. Welcome back. So this semester I'm teaching an advanced public policy class. I would say this is a course that you would normally find in graduate programs, but I've taught it for a while here at Hendrix, and I have to say Hendrix students respond quite well. This semester, no exception. The course is taught like you might find it again in a lot of graduate programs. It's real-world case studies to help students really understand some of our social problems, craft potential solutions, thinking about how to implement those solutions. Something new we did this year through this work with both the City of Conway and AARP is to think about what it means to be a livable community. And to be honest, we actually started at the other end of the spectrum. We started with college students and young people starting out careers and thinking what would make Conway attractive to them. But as you've heard throughout this, what works for one segment of the population works for everybody, right? And so then we started looking more directly at the 50-plus community, thinking about older Arkansans and what livable communities might mean across Arkansas and especially in Conway. Well, one thing we learned pretty early on is we needed some good information from residents. So we actually partnered, Hendrix has been a longtime partner with Talk Business and Politics here in Arkansas, and especially their polling arm. We co-sponsor the poll throughout the year. So we worked with Talk Business and Politics to do a statewide poll of older Arkansans. And students are going to be sharing the data with you now and some ideas that spring from that data. Let me introduce the first two speakers. Kayla Krabinsky is a senior biology and environmental studies major from Hot Springs, Arkansas. And Kara Boop is also a senior politics major from Little Rock, Arkansas. And they are here to share the survey results.
Hey everybody. So like Dr. Guest said, this is a statewide survey that we did in collaboration with Talk Business and Politics. We ended up with 901 respondents of varying community types across the state, with about a quarter of them being urban residents, about a third being suburban, and the rest being rural. It included people from all 4 congressional districts fairly evenly. The confidence level of the results are 95%, indicating that it's likely that this is how people of this demographic feel and that it's not, random chance that we're getting these types of answers. It was a 20-question survey, and for pretty much all the questions, a plurality of respondents indicated that they were satisfied in whatever category we were asking about. So some of the questions targeted quality of life, or like subjective happiness or satisfaction. Others specifically address transportation as well as access to important services and resources such as medical care, groceries, recreation activities, internet, things of that nature. And we also asked about how affordable they felt their community was. So most people were happy, as I said, but there was, some of the highlights were a large discrepancy between rural and suburban and urban residents. So rural residents definitely felt that it was more affordable to live where they were, but they had greater difficulties accessing quality health care, accessing groceries. Despite those challenges, rural residents were the most likely to say they wanted to remain where they were for the rest of their life. Rural residents also tended to have less internet access and less recreation opportunities. So we'll kind of go through each one of these and think about why that might be the case. So probably the most important key distinction is access to essential services. And I think this is mostly a product of distance. So for a quarter of rural respondents, healthcare was at least 30 minutes away or more. This is compared to only 8 or 5% of suburban and urban respondents. For about 2/3 of rural respondents, healthcare is at least 15 minutes away, which is compared to only a third urban or suburban respondents. This is probably a big influence in why rural respondents feel they don't have adequate health care, At least a third of them do, which is much more than urban or suburban residents say. It's similar for groceries. For about a quarter of rural respondents, groceries are more than 15 minutes away, compared to only 5 or 4% of suburban and urban respondents. I mean, this makes sense. When you're out in the country, like, it takes longer to get places. But once you start to lose that ability to transport yourself as easily, this becomes more and more important.
Here we have some graphical representations of this data. The most important things that we felt were there was a discrepancy between rural individuals, our rural communities, and our urban and suburban communities, or our healthcare travel times, and the time it takes to travel to a grocery store. And these are going to be very important for our aging communities because these people might not have the time or energy to travel all the way 30 plus minutes in some cases to their nearest grocery stores. And this is also very important when these people need to travel for their healthcare needs. And so just because you live in a rural area and you're living out there for the peace and the quiet and the solitude, that doesn't mean that you need to have a non-livable community where you have to travel really, really far for your healthcare and grocery needs.
Exactly. And so other than essential services like healthcare and groceries, it is also harder for rural residents to access other opportunities like internet recreation and various enrichment activities. So 27% of our rural respondents said they lack reliable internet, which is about twice that of urban and suburban residents. And particularly because how far apart things are out in the country and how as your ability to transport yourself diminishes, it gets even more challenging. Lack of access to internet is even more important because that might be a way that you might connect with people or order medications or deliveries or groceries. And if you don't have that and you don't have a way to transport yourself, that's a pretty serious issue. Similarly, rural residents, more than urban and suburban residents, felt they didn't have enough recreational opportunities that suited their needs. About half of rural residents compared to 40% of urban or about a third of suburban residents. And then not just rural residents, but everyone across the board said that among the recreation categories we surveyed, restaurants and shopping were the most desired recreation subcategory that they wanted to see more of. Followed by arts and entertainment. So it wasn't necessarily parks or events, it was restaurants and shopping. That's what everybody wanted.
So let's compare these three types of communities again. We've got the urban, suburban, and rural. And we can see that those people who live in rural areas have less reliable access to internet. And that confounds some of the problems we were talking about earlier that Kiara just mentioned, that if these people can't travel to go see a doctor, and then they don't have internet or telemedicine, then they're going to be seriously lacking in their healthcare needs. Furthermore, the people who were in urban and suburban areas were much more satisfied than people in rural areas as far as recreational activities go.
So kind of the one area in which rural residents seemed more pleased than suburban and urban residents was cost of living. And this probably has a great deal to do with why there are quite a few people wanting to remain in place in their rural community, even though they might have more challenges accessing those services, right? So many more urban respondents found that the cost of living was highest. You can see that more people clicked yes for urban than any other category, and more people clicked somewhat for urban than for any other category. And so, for a rural resident, it's likely that, maybe they don't have the resources to move, or they think it's expensive to move, and they think, they're willing to put up with some of those trade-offs. But they shouldn't have to, and similarly, urban residents shouldn't have to feel that it is expensive to live in their community where they are.
Yep, so this was our final bar graph for this data. And we can see that the largest gray bar for rural is that they feel like it's very expensive to live in their community. And that's going to be because it costs more to get groceries out to these rural areas. It's going to cost more for these people to drive their cars out to their rural areas. And then one bar graph that I decided not to include in these slideshows was about the quality of life. And do you feel like the quality of life in Arkansas is better or worse or the same as other states? And I decided to not include that, even though it was a question that was asked over the last several years, but because I feel like, that's a very subjective question, and it doesn't provide as much data or information for us to use in the slideshow. So we decided to rely on these other data instead.
Right, so just to finish up, I'll return to some of the highlights here. So most people, mostly happy. That's good news, right? 50 to 60%, or even more in some questions, were satisfied with whatever service we were asking about. However, there's still large discrepancies between urban and suburban and rural residents. And I think that we all know that it is typically more challenging to develop programs in rural communities just because people are more spread out, and so there's not necessarily as many people who benefit from a given grant or program. But I think that we can and should do better. And some of the biggest gaps have to do with internet access, access to healthcare and groceries, recreation. Those are our key areas. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Kayla and Kira. All right, now the other two students will drill down to the data, through the data a little more, and try to look a little more locally and present a few policy ideas for the city of Conway. So Philip Powell here is a senior politics major from Jonesboro, Arkansas, and Raven Johnson, also politics major. She's from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Hello, hi, I'm Raven. So, never used one of these before. There we go. So to give a little background, we are in Conway, Arkansas, and so for the duration of our section of the presentation, we'll be really only focusing on Conway. There are 3 relevant surveys that we sort of focused on, and so there's the citizens survey that was done by the city of Conway in 2020, the Talk Business and Politics Hendrix survey that Kira and Kayla mentioned, and then there was a survey done by Hendrix and UAMS. It was a statewide survey, so we'll be kind of going through 3 different data sets for this. So a little bit about Conway. Only 10% of the population are 65 and over. Obviously, it increases if we go down to 50 and up, but it's a relatively smaller section, I would say, than probably the other regional cities. So like Little Rock or Hot Springs, they obviously have much higher percentages. And also, the average age is 29 and a half years old, which is really pretty young for other relevant cities. And a really important caveat for our presentation is that all of our proposals and recommendations come from data that was only delineated by Congressional District 2, which does also include Little Rock. So any sort of recommendations that we have for the city of Conway, we have to assume a few things and sort of say that, oh, well, maybe a Little Rock citizen would say similar things about Conway. So the city of Conway has a lot of really great plans to increase walkability and interconnectivity within the city through their Connect Conway plan, which will basically connect UCA to downtown with a huge, I think it was like $120 million grant or something like that. And so in that sense, we will have a lot of interconnectivity. However, it does seem that a little bit of the intentionality is not focused on making sure that things are super accessible for people who are of the aging population. And so many of our conversations will be skewed to trying to engage the aging population.
Hi everyone, I'm Philip. Thanks so much for being here. And with going off what Raven said earlier, given the fact that our median age in Conway is 29.5 years, whereas the country as a whole, it's more around 38 years median age, We feel like the city is definitely really focused on the younger demographic in a lot of ways for a good reason. I mean, our median age is so young. The city is so young because we're in the city of colleges. But we feel like there could be a greater sense of intentionality towards really serving the older and retired population of the city as well. So getting into that, we kind of decided on about 3 different main issues that we feel like the city could work on based on what the older residents of Conway and Congressional District 2 more broadly are saying that they would like to see more of. And the first of those is government responsiveness. So in the survey, we asked a question of, do you feel like the government is responsive to your needs? And according to the survey results, 81% of residents 60 and up feel like the government should be more responsive, and that's based on the poll that we just ran with Talk Business. As a better breakdown of that, I believe it was, so as a better breakdown, out of the 200 surveyed in Congressional District 2, 97 people of those 200 said the government is not responsive to their needs, which is obviously not ideal. So how can we change that perception really, or actually do more tangible things to improve that perception that the government is not responsive to the needs of the elderly community? So we came up with a couple of ideas, and the first idea that we thought would be beneficial would be for the city to put together some kind of commission or board to really focus on advocacy. While there are a lot of nonprofits that exist around Central Arkansas that do direct services, we found some great nonprofits that do that. When we're talking about government responsiveness, we feel like this is the type of thing that could really engage some of the retired community in the actual process of government. In Mike's presentation earlier, you brought up how one city, I forgot which one in particular, was doing some great programming with the retired community in that city, bringing them in to learn about local government. And so we think that there's a lot of room to do that just to help the retired community feel like the city's really listening to them. And we also thought that board could really focus on mobility issues. Raven brought up the amazing plan that's going on right now, making the city a lot more walkable. But in general, like as Mike was bringing up, we need benches, right? So this is the type of thing that could help facilitate benches and the other things that the elderly community, retired people, or people who have mobility disabilities might need to actually enjoy the new walkability that the city's investing in, which is great. And the other thing is public forums, right? This is just on one topic, but if the mayor's office or the city council wanted to hold public forums to really and advertise those to get retired residents in to actually just talk about what do they think are the issues with the city, how is the city not meeting their needs if there's a perception that it's not. And that would also just improve the city's relationship with the retired communities in general as well.
And so, given the survey data, the next sort of theme that we saw of sort of the lower social interaction is kind of at a low point, and specifically in Congressional District 2. So, about 43% of older residents in Congressional District 2 only get interaction from their close circle about once a week or even less frequently. And 43% is just, it's not ideal. It could be better. Especially given that before the pandemic, 91.2% of older Arkansans were somewhat or very satisfied with their level of social interaction, but then after, or I guess kind of during, because I don't know if we're after at that point, that number decreased to 78.7%, which is a 12.5% difference. So definitely significant and not something to go unnoticed, of course. And then another aspect, and this sort of ties into something that Dr. Guest brought up earlier, which is that only 29.5% of older Arkansan residents partake in organized social groups about once a week. And even more notable, about a quarter of the percentage of the total never even partake in any organized social groups at all. And so, given that, some recommendations that we've sort of come together with is to maybe make some of the already staple events in Conway to be more suitable for multi-generational interactions. So, for example, the Conway Farmers Market is from 8 a.m. to noon, and mostly you have, the food vendors, you have crafts, you have art, but something that could help is there's also another market that happens probably once or twice a month on Saturdays. That's from 10 a.m. to 3, and it's called the Demure Market. And you have a lot of, it's a young, sort of young, hip kind of market where you have a coffee cart, and you have vintage clothing vendors, and you just have, it's super popular, a lot of people go. And if you could somehow combine the two in some way, you'd have a really cool intergenerational moment, I think, which would be really cool to see. And so the other thing that Philip has already highlighted is just making sure that at any local or city event, that intention is there to have adequate seating, to make sure that the marketing material is actually accessible and readable to people who may not have adequate, sight or ability to see, as well as, hearing, making sure that people can be heard if it's at a local event or a city council meeting or something like that. And then, turn it over.
Sure. So, as part of my, some of the work that I've been doing in the class, I've been doing a lot of research on entertainment districts, because whenever we met with the city, some of the representatives of city government earlier this semester, it seems like it's been a while at this point, we were talking a lot about how an entertainment district could really help revive and bring a lot of community into downtown. Some of these entertainment districts could be like, just a couple of great examples are the River Market District in Little Rock, right? Very popular place for people to be hanging out on weekends, during the evenings. Another great example is Fayetteville, another college town just like Conway. They have their wonderful Dixon Street entertainment district. So what is an entertainment district? Well, it's basically the legislature passed, I believe it's a measure back in 2019 that allows municipalities to do these entertainment districts where you can get wristbands, and if you're over the age of 21, let's say you could go into King's right downtown, we love King's, and you could, get a drink and you actually walk around in the community with that, with the wristband and with the approved cup. And we actually think, King's is a great example of what Raven was kind of talking about the multi-generational appeal. And we just feel like there's so much potential for an entertainment district, and we know the city's already working on this, to really broaden that multi-generational appeal of our downtown space in Conway. So we definitely would recommend the development of an entertainment district, and part of what makes an entertainment district so successful is the type of vendors that are included, right? So again, like whenever I think about all the great hits in downtown Conway, I think about Mike's Place, I love King's, we love Toadsuck whenever that comes around every year, and a bunch of other businesses, but really trying to attract really vendors that can have a broad base of appeal to both older residents and younger residents can really facilitate those intergenerational interactions that we want to be seeing. Dr. Guest brought up Putnam earlier, but Putnam's big thing is about building bridges, right? So what's the big thing, the important thing about joining those organizations is that you actually are talking to people who you wouldn't usually talk to, and building relationships with folks you wouldn't usually build relationships with. And so we think that the entertainment district could really be helpful in that. And the other thing that we kind of noticed, and this is definitely more anecdotal, we don't have hard data on this, but it seems like a lot of businesses in downtown Conway close really early. At least from we've been here 4 years, so, and so a big part of that is how can we make downtown a little bit more lively, businesses staying open later into the evening, because that would allow people opportunity for those types of interactions and community building to occur, and getting vendors that are willing to stay open that late, and see how we can facilitate more business like that. Still next, yeah. So that goes into our third issue, which is cost of living, which is something that Kira and Kayla touched on as well. Cost of living is an interesting issue, and there's a reason why, because Conway is actually a fairly cheap place to live, both in terms of broader America, but also in comparison to Hot Springs, to Jonesboro, where I'm from, to Little Rock, to Fayetteville. Our cost of living is actually significantly lower, and yet despite that, it turns out that a lot of older residents are actually saying cost of living they think is somewhat of an issue. And so we thought, it's really important, a big part of, why we went into this and tried to come up with some policy recommendations here is so that we could, really feel like listening to the retired community and the folks over 50 or over 65. And so diving into why is that an issue? Why is there a perception that Conway has a cost of living issue whenever, at least on the macro level, it seems like we're a much cheaper place to live? And part of that is probably just because of all the inflation we've seen over the last 2 years. That could probably be changing that. But also just making sure that we're being mindful of and actually trying to search for those answers of what is costing retired people in Conway so much to live. Is it the housing issue? Is it healthcare? Is it groceries? What could it be? And so, the best way to do that is we think to really, in the next citizen survey, to try to tailor down and ask some more specific questions about what do you think is expensive, because, as I, here's the other one. As I covered, 41% agree the cost of living is somewhat an issue, but that doesn't really tell you what the issue is. We need to get more specific about what that is and see if there's something the city can possibly do. So that's our main recommendation on the cost of living concern, but that's the third issue identified. And we didn't caveat this at the start of the presentation, but Kira and Kayla talked about it. But for the most part, the retired community in Conway is actually pretty satisfied. So we really had to dive deep to try to find what the issues were. Dr. Guess could tell you that as well. We were looking through, we're like, well, it seems like people really like it, so we don't really know what to do. But we had to dive deep and kind of nitpick to try to find the areas in which we thought there could be improvement that the city, either the government could facilitate or we as a community could just come together and facilitate. So yeah, that's the end of our presentation. So thank you so much. Any questions?
Yeah, are there any quick questions for any of the four students?
I'm curious, when you were talking to them about the study about the internet, did they say they actually didn't have internet access, or was it just not reliable and high speed where they could do the telehealth? Did we drill down that far? I've seen the questions, but it's been a while since.
Yes, we did. We distinguished between having any internet access, reliable internet access. So yeah, we did ask that. And there were a few people who had some internet, but not reliable internet, but it was mostly yes or no.
So they did have access to it?
Yes, most people had access to reliable
I know there were a lot of grants and since COVID.
We do know it's a problem in Arkansas, right? And a previous governor launched the big rural initiative to broadband access, and that's still a work in progress, but it will greatly improve in Arkansas.
One piece of information I'd like to see is a lot of people retire and move to Conway. And I'd like to see better numbers on that. I did a little anecdotal on that, and be surprised by people locate to Conway without any real connections. And whether that's really a marketing issue that we could be thinking about.
That's a very good point. I don't know if any of you have a comment?
The only sort of comment that I have is the citizen survey had a question that was like, Conway is a blank place to retire or to create a family or whatever. And whenever people filled in the blank for retire, it only had about a 64% positivity rate, and for all other categories, it ranked in the 80 or 90% positivity rate. So there's definitely room for growth in the retirement sector in Conway.
It's a very good point. We are fond of saying here it's a great retirement community because of the 3 colleges. And we believe that at Hendrix, and all the activities are open. I know there are a lot of things are open at UCA too, to attract retirees to participate in community life. I think we could do a better job of that. If I had a recommendation, it was building, who said bridges? Philip talked about bridges, building big, better bridges between our universities and the retired community here. And Mike, yes.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my question. First of all, it sounds like I should check out King's the next time I came out. But that was going to be my question. How did the multiple colleges in town, did that come up at all kind of in the survey or any of the follow-on kind of policy conversations as kind of a benefit or anything else?
I think, I'll answer first. Is that okay? And I'll give it to you. I think that, at least for me and from my perspective, that's a big part of why we were talking about the multi-generational bridge building interactions, because there's just so much potential here with, how many undergrads does UCA have? Quite a bit bigger than Hendrix, probably 9,000 or so, plus the 1,000 undergrads at Hendrix, plus all the folks at CBC. I mean, we are a really young city, but there's so much potential there to build those bridges that Dr. Guest just kind of mentioned and I mentioned earlier between the younger generation and the retirement community. And there's so much, mutual benefit that can just occur because of those interactions. And so we were just trying to, I guess, think about the best way the city could facilitate that. But the potential's there. It's just trying to figure out how to execute, and start building them,
Yeah, I was just going to say that the survey that we did was a statewide survey, so we don't have results specifically for Conway and how colleges would impact, but maybe some of the ones you guys looked at. Did they ask any questions about that?
I'll say this, my students are tired of me using this example, but we have this thing called the Hendrix Village across the street, and it is built to be this livable community, walkable. There's you guys know the terminology better than I do. The places where you live upstairs and you have your little shop or your office downstairs.
Mixed-use development.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's definitely a mixed-use development. There was even talk at some point how great it would be to locate an elementary school there, right? A boutique hotel. They're always thinking about what might be next for that. But there's a lot of single-family homes too, and a lot of retirees settle there. And one of them approached me and said, there's a lot of collective wisdom and knowledge over here, and we'd really like to interact more with the Hendrix student body. How about if we offer short courses, non-credit courses about life, how to life, right? Have that interaction. Some of our students go over there into their homes and do that. Maybe they come here, and some of the topics were financial investment. I mean, what college student doesn't need to learn about financial investment, right? Cooking, how you actually put together a real meal, right? Doing your taxes, all kinds of ideas, because retirees over there have great wisdom, knowledge that they can share. So that might be a great way to get that interaction going. We're literally right across the street. There's a bridge that connects us, a literal bridge. So yeah.
And they all have front porches.
That's right. And a walkable neighborhood, right? Yeah, there's even a little park back there, a nature preserve, Nature Creek, yeah. Good. Yeah, exactly. Right. So can I get Mike, Ashley, and Laura to come forward and have a seat, and we'll continue the discussion. I know we've sort of already started the panel discussion, and certainly if there are more questions for the students, they can chime in as well. What I want to do is more formally introduce Laura. I know you met her a little bit earlier, but I want to make sure you have a little bit of her background. Laura is, as I mentioned, the outreach coordinator for the Arkansas Geriatric Education Collaborative at UAMS. And in that role, she travels around a lot throughout the state, providing free community and health professional programs focused on geriatric training and education. She's done quite a few of those here. In fact, very recently, I attended one on dementia right here in this room that Laura led, quite informative. Laura has a background in dietetics and has over 30 years of healthcare management experience in education and training. I'm going to give her a hard time because her undergrad is not a liberal arts institution. She went to The Ohio State University. Hard to think of a bigger university, right? And also holds a Master of Science degree from East Texas State University. But I should add, most importantly, she's no stranger to the liberal arts, having sent 3 children who graduated from Hendrix College. Yep. Okay, so we'll start a conversation, and there's one mic up there already. I'll join you guys. So, Laura, I'm going to talk to you first because we haven't heard from you directly. Really curious about the role of healthcare and provision of healthcare services, and especially community members, businesses, services that are friendly to folks who may have different sorts of needs as they age.
That's a good question. It's a tough question. I think I saw a statistic the other day that said we only have 151 geriatricians in Arkansas, and we need about 2 to 3 times that number. So future students, please consider. It's a great career path. But I'll speak particularly for UAMS. We strive very hard. We're located right on Cedar and Pine, and we were talking about this a little bit ago. When you tell someone to please come to UAMS, they go, oh no, it's got to be huge and hard. But the Institute on Aging is located, right off the freeway. We do have a parking lot right there in front of our building, so they did a lot of their homework to have a facility where people can come. But we also do a lot of training through my grant. It's called the 4 M's: what matters, medication, mobility, and oh gosh, my mind just slipped up because I'm in front of people. But we do a lot of training in the clinic with people about what matters to an older adult, asking them, what do you want to focus on today for your visit, okay? A lot of dementia-friendly business training. Your students have helped us with that, in particularly healthcare clinics, but also just in businesses around Conway, the central Arkansas area. So we are all about, trying to spread the word about being age-friendly and dementia-friendly. They're just all important. What else did you ask me? I talked to Rock Region Metro, and I don't know if many of you know about it, but they're particularly working in the Conway area on their micro-transit, and I hope y'all are accessing that, because the more success they have with that, the better our chances are of getting that in other communities. So the transportation, we realize, is huge, but the bus route in Little Rock does come to UAMS, and particularly can drop off at the Institute on Aging. So we realize transportation is a huge issue for everyone, but the more we use that transportation system, the more we can get more routes, better routes, more frequent routes. But the micro-transit in particular is a huge asset. Did I answer?
Yes, thank you.
Is that micro-transit in Conway? It looks like it's being used a lot. I see it.
Yes, when I spoke to them this week, they said that y'all are really using it, and in fact, your numbers are making the wait times longer because you have so many, and they've actually requested more vans, but due to lots of things, now the vehicles are in short supply. And then if you have one out for repairs, then you have a whole nother, you're still waiting on the parts to be, so it's just a vicious cycle. But yes, Conway is definitely using the micro transit.
Great, thanks. Just a nice segue. I want to send apologies on the behalf of Mayor Bart Castleberry. He did intend to be here. I think this is general knowledge, so he won't mind me sharing. He actually broke his ankle and is dealing with that, so he couldn't come. I've had a few meetings with the mayor. We talked through, and I don't think he's ever used the term livable community, but these are the things that are his priorities. Improve public safety, I think you asked that question earlier. Transportation infrastructure for motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians. Economic development, including job creation and quality of life. And here's a quote from the mayor: recreational amenities support strong economic development. But I think he also goes on to say that he firmly believes that the involvement of residents is one of the most important components in building a better community. And that sort of speaks to the survey results that residents found a government that's not responsive. How can we be sure that we are actually talking to the 50-plus community to get their wants and needs and desires when we think about designing, improving the livability of our communities? And that's for anyone or everyone.
I'll address work the AARP Arkansas is doing to actually hear the voices of the 50-plus in Arkansas. We are using what is called a Vital Voices survey, and we have identified several categories that are important to the 50-plus population, one of them being, of course, livable communities and transportation. And with that information, it's great because now we have objective data that we can use to make informed decisions. And we can hear directly from our community members to let us know what are areas that directly impact them, and whether it's recreational or whether it's residential, whatever the case may be, we have data to support some of the actions that we plan to take. So that's one of the ways through our Vital Voices survey. Mike, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you covered it really well, Ashley. I guess the other things that I would add are kind of thinking about coming to do a thing, right? Like, it's one thing to like come and be talked to, but it's another thing to come to something. Some of the ideas that Philip and Raven were sharing, right, are like, come to this thing that's happening where there's a lot of other people across the community at it, and use that rather than saying, come tell us what you think. Go to where people are and use that opportunity to ask them what they think, right? There's a lot of really cool ideas that communities are doing where they're holding an event at a public space, and then they're asking people while they're there, what would you like this public space to be? What are your ideas for it? How would you feel if this was a park? How would you feel if this was a, if bike parking was here? So finding ways to actually bring people into the community or go to the community where they're at. And then the other thing I would say is particularly with, I think that applies to anybody, but when you think about older adults, if from the city's perspective, it's working with the partners who are working with older adults on a day-to-day basis, like AARP, but also folks in the community who are delivering services, Meals on Wheels and other places that are going to have that very kind of intimate knowing folks on a day-to-day basis, and finding ways to kind of use and work with those folks to get a better sense of folks' priorities beyond kind of what you see in here and the great survey that was shared earlier.
Mike, you worked in this area as a lobbyist before on the Hill, right, in DC, and now you're working with state offices that also are extending resources, lobbying their legislators, right? I think to the people in this room and watching online, it probably makes good sense that investing in livable communities is an investment in the future. It pays off economically. That economic argument is not an important one. How hard is it to make that argument with policymakers? Is this an uphill battle, or is it pretty easy to convince folks that this is the way we should be going?
I don't know if anything's easy, right? But I think there's two really powerful points here that I think resonate with policymakers on these topics. One is, a mayor or a city council member is going to have a much tighter connection to the people in their community than a member of Congress, right? They see them at the grocery store, they walk on those same sidewalks, they drive on the same road. So there is that kind of that tangible, real connection. That is always going to be valuable. The more that people who elected officials know are raising their voices and talking to them. I think you look at a lot of where elected officials' passion comes from on their passion issues. Almost all the times it's a personal connection to something, right? Elected officials who care about family caregiving, they themselves in most cases were probably a family caregiver or had a story like that. So I think bringing real life, if your neighbor's asking you something, that's really important. And then to your point, the economic numbers make the case here, right? When you make a community more walkable, it raises the property values of those homes. That means more tax revenue to the city, right? That means more things that they can do. The entertainment districts that we're talking about just down there, really good idea. That's going to raise more revenue for the city. It's going to make people want to go to businesses and spend their money. So all of these things make a community more vibrant, more walkable. So pairing that kind of hard data with the personal story and the personal connection, I think is always going to be the way to go. Ashley, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think Little Rock's done a great job with the parks and the trail system, the bike routes, all those kind of things, and it's just been amazing to see, because you see all ages out there, walking, and your animals are allowed to come. So I'm just speaking personally that I see intergenerational all the time on the trail system, and I've always thought that realtors need to be more involved in some of the stuff that we do. That's that's how they make their living, so I would think that would be a hot topic. So I always thought maybe we should talk to them more too. They could advocate for us. Or developers.
And the realtors, so the National Association of Realtors also they have a grant program that's very similar to what I described with the AARP Community Challenge, where realtors are supporting projects in their community because they see the tie-in to that as well. And I'll just take a minute to shout out, AARP has a partnership with the National Association of Realtors, so if you go to their website, they'll tie it to our AARP Livability Index. So when somebody's searching for a home, they can get the score of that community's livability on kind of a range of factors: housing, transportation, walkability, things like that. So you're right on.
Actually, after saying no, I didn't have anything to add, I thought through it and I thought maybe I do have a little bit. So back to the lawmakers' question. This is not necessarily a lawmaker, but we think of AARP as having grass tops, right? So these are influencers in our communities that can help decisions be made. And one way that we have kind of partnered with the grass top is thinking about digital equity and increasing equity, access to broadband across the state, knowing that millions of dollars have been designated for Arkansas to receive that funding. Now deciding really how can AARP Arkansas be the voice for our constituency. Well, a part of that is being a part of the digital planning committee. And with that, we may not necessarily be talking to a lawmaker within that committee, but we may. But we also may have an opportunity to decide what information is disseminated to those members on the committee. Those committee members then go on to talk to lawmakers, and that influences which parts of the community receive the funding, because we know that that funding is focused in rural and underserved areas throughout the state. So although we do directly advocate and talk to our lawmakers, we also have indirect communication through sitting on committees and being a part, and actually allowing AARP to serve as a direct grass top for other organizations who need to know what our influence is for the state and what resources that are valuable that we offer to lawmakers, and knowing that if Arkansas is approximately 35.8 or 38% 50 plus, these are the most important group of people that offer an opportunity to vote, right? Their voice needs to be heard. And if they are going out to vote, which we see in our past primary election, they're more apt to go out and vote than the younger population, and you should be taking their concerns seriously. So all of that, even if it's not direct interaction, it definitely still plays into having an impact on with lawmakers.
Great, thank you. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience members to see if they have any questions of the panel. It looks like we already have one online.
We have one online that's more of a comment. It's from Cindy Lou, and I'm just going to read it to you. It says, has any of the panel heard of Peachtree City, Georgia? They have an extensive electric golf cart community, as in the high schoolers take a trail to school and the family go to stores. However, I am priced out unless it is an apartment. So, walkable or electric bike / golf cart trails.
First of all, the online questioners seem to have a very similar voice and tone when they speak. But yes, we have heard of Peachtree City, Georgia, and their world-famous trail system. We actually so AARP has a tool called the AARP Walk Audit Toolkit that folks can go around and do audits of their community sidewalks and infrastructure. We actually worked with somebody for Peachtree earlier this year to create an addendum to that specifically for trails and cart paths and other things like that. So it really is a great kind of example of using interconnected trail networks. It's a really unique example too, right? But other communities are using that same philosophy to connect other parts of their area. So Chapel Hill, North Carolina is a place about a couple hours from where I grew up. They connected their healthcare system with housing where most of the workforce was living, with bicycle trails. So folks, if they could ride their bike to work safely, not worry about getting, running on a busy street or getting hit. And so it's really a great philosophy that you can connect, not just in kind of, big open public spaces, but also connecting them with city streets that are protected as well. So you have a protected bike lane that might run through downtown that then connects to a trail that's going to connect you across a park to another area of town. So it is a really great way to kind of incite activity, connect areas of town without having to kind of add a roadway. And we know that a lot of those trail systems create a real economic development boost. So somebody on a bike rolling through a community is much more likely to stop and have several cups of coffee or maybe a beer after their bike ride in their neighborhood rather than somebody who's just driving or strolling through. Y'all have anything to add to that?
Other questions? Yeah. Right here.
Entertainment districts, we kind of have one, it's downtown. So if you designate it as an entertainment district, what would it add to that?
Well, I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of some of the stuff we've heard. Well, okay, Philip, you are the expert.
Call myself that. The entertainment district, essentially what it is it means that people who are over the age of 21 can get a wristband from the city, and I believe that city charges for it, which is what he's talking about with raising revenues for the city, which could be great. And essentially what you can do is you can go into a restaurant or a bar and you can buy a drink there, and you can actually take that drink outside. And the entertainment district is kind of a confined space, so it's like one block, and all the vendors on that street would all be on board, and so they'd all sign on, and so you could then take that drink into a store, and drink while you peruse or you shop or so forth, or you could just hang out outside. And we were also talking about when we were doing this research, the Chris Allen stage area. I think that's a beautiful area of Conway. It's a great stage, great area. That's the type of thing that we think on nice summer days that are hopefully coming up pretty soon. They seem like they're already here. Would really, get people out and get people engaged in downtown. And this is the type of thing we know at least the city's already been looking into developing. But yes, so does that answer your question, sir?
The liquor license, because we don't have essentially a dry town.
Yeah.
And all these things are special permits for the restaurants. What you have to law change, or no, you have to get the city to vote for a wet town essentially.
Yes, so the dry county issue is kind of an issue in the way. I believe when we were talking to the representatives in the city government, they sort of had a workaround. They're going to have to apply for some sort of license, I think, but there it's all kind of in the works. So.
Yeah, I mean, the city already has the exemption, as you said. There's already alcohol down there in restaurants and whatnot. It falls under a constitutional amendment that allows it for economic development purposes. And so this umbrella would also work for this. I think the key here, though, is not to emphasize the alcohol, right? It's what Mike was saying earlier about these events that get people out, and hopefully in an intergenerational sort of way. So Conway already has, I don't know if it's on First Fridays. In my mind, it's First Friday Art Walk. Is it First Fridays? Okay. Where there are vendors that have things out on the streets, and there's pop-ups, and people are walking around. It's more pedestrian friendly, and so you get people out and doing stuff. I think, adding the walkable liquor to it, or beer and wine, I think, isn't that what the limit is, beer and wine,
I think so, yes.
Yeah. is just to make it more appealing for some people, but obviously that's not the cornerstone of the event. It's all the other things, including, free entertainment at the stage and, again, pop-up vendors and things like that really bring people out. Raven?
I was just going to speak to the entertainment districts also just are another form of trying to revitalize downtown. You can do that in other ways too by adding like an arts district, which is kind of different, but some cities find entertainment districts to be really profitable in revitalizing.
Other questions? It's Phil.
Granddaughter, she came here at our talk. Where would she go to? I have a granddaughter. She came here at our talk. She's 49 now. Where would she go to check on this affordable housing?
In Conway specifically, or?
She's over in, about 20 miles.
Perryville's where she lives.
In
Perryville.
Perryville now.
Yeah.
So I could say something a little bit more broad, not specific to the community, but one, I guess if she's interested in like the affordability of her community versus others, she could go to the AARP Livability Index. There's to kind of learn where her community sits on affordability compared to others. There's also a lot of places will have like community action networks and things like that that will help connect people to services that are available. I'm not aware of any specifics though in that community.
Are you talking about needing housing assistance?
Yes, it's housing.
I would say your whatever county office, to start there with your county office, and ask where she would particularly go.
But she had in the past checked on that, and they didn't help her at all. So now, if she was 50 plus, would she have more qualifications for assistance?
I don't know about age so much as it might be based on income. So the county was not able to help her. Did you say she went to a county?
That's right, they did not help her. So this
I was gonna
like
say,
2
maybe
years
she-
ago or longer.
Is she getting any other kind of assistance? I'm not trying to be personal, but maybe they could refer her.
Yes, she has Medicaid.
Okay, I would think maybe go to her Medicaid person or the Medicaid office and ask who could help her with housing assistance.
Like I said, she has, and they did not help her at all. So now if she became 50 plus to be AARP 8, would she qualify to get more assistance for housing?
I do not know the specific guidelines on housing assistance. I'm trying to think, we could probably start with the state attorney general's office too. They might could help you, someone at the state level.
There's an organization called CAPCO, Central Arkansas, something or other. I think they handle that.
That, and then I just thought another one was the Arkansas Legal Aid Office. You know, an attorney might be able to help her too. They have a lot of people on a lot of different things.
Okay, Arkansas Legal Aid. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
You bet.
And I would always suggest reaching out to your state representative or senator, especially if you feel like the state's not being responsive. So looking up whoever represents your daughter in the state legislature, in the House or the Senate. They have constituent services in their offices, and this is the kind of thing they do. At least help connect you to the right person.
And what is that called?
Just the elected representative or senator in the Arkansas General Assembly in the state legislature.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. What else? Any other questions? All right. Well, Laura, can I ask you for some closing thoughts?
I just want to tell everyone thank you so much on behalf of both Hendrix College, the Arkansas Geriatric Education Collaborative, and AARP. And I wish the mayor could have been here, so send our condolences to him. But y'all have been a wonderful audience, both in person and online. I hope that you come away with one thing today. I've learned just, from being with this group today. And I want to give the students a round of applause. We always want to encourage our students. Y'all are the future. I know you hear that all the time. I don't mean it to be a cliche, whatever, but you all are the future. And please, take this course and take what you've learned to heart. And I know you'll use it in the future in some way. Maybe not initially, but I know in the long run you will. But you do represent the future. So make it great for all of us. And thank y'all for attending. And thank y'all for your time today. Dr. Guess, I can't thank you enough for all you do for all of us.
Yes. And I want to thank our panelists. I learned a heck of a lot today, actually. I want to invite everybody to, we have some refreshments right out through these doors. If the weather's nice, we can go out on the patio. I know some people around campus are listening in online. You have time to come over. Classes have ended. Come on over and join us.
To the entertainment district.
Yeah, to the SLTC Entertainment District, right out here. And thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.